basically the idea behind this webinar is to talk about the very beginnings of Rhino and how to get into it, how to get started, and how to kind of overcome blank sheet syndrome, where you're sitting here looking at a piece of software for the first time and trying to figure out how to get going. So we're going to model a simple object, and I don't claim for this to be the end-all, do-all of industrial design or anything, but I whipped up a little sketch of the earbud that was on the advertisement that we're going to go ahead and try and build. And so that I don't have to print this out and have it stuck to my monitor, I'm going to bring this into the modeling window so that I can actually have a reference of what I'm looking at. And to do that, I'm going to use the picture frame command. And what picture frame does is allows you to locate an image on your computer and drop it right into the modeling window. And the cool thing about this is it's available in all your viewports, and you can see it's in the front view here. And you can also, since this is just a piece of geometry with an image mapped onto it, you can also copy and paste it. So I can have 2 copies of it. I can rotate this using Gumball and have a second reference of it. If I wanted to look at it in top view, I could set up a modeling box if I wanted to have references and things like that. But in this case, since this is kind of a perspective sketch, and it's supposed to kind of get me over just kind of get me off of bottom dead center and get me started. So I'm going to use this as a reference, and I'm not going to necessarily try and copy this exactly, but because what typically happens is when you do a sketch, it's easy to lie, cheat, and steal and make things in sketches that look great that can't actually happen in reality. So the idea is, this is like a 2-second thumbnail I did to kind of give myself some direction, and then I'm going to take this thumbnail and I'm going to translate it into 3D, and I'm going to make some decisions in 3D as I go to determine whether or not I like what's going on here. So I'm just going to stick this, I'm going to just stick this off to the side right now. And one of the cool things I like about Gumball is if I pick this and then hit the F3 key, it's going to bring up the properties. And you'll notice that there's a bunch of different buttons up at the top here, and the one that I'm interested in primarily is material. And what I can do in here is, you'll notice in the transparency, if I slide this, you'll notice that the image fades in and out. And in this case, it's not really all that important for me to fade the image out. But if I was to set up like a reference box or something like that, and I were to bring in a bunch of images to trace over, chances are I'd probably want to fade them out. And so I could do that just by dragging the transparency slider up a little bit and backing that off. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to leave it up, but I wanted to make everybody aware of that possibility there. So let's just go ahead and get started. And basically, if we look at this product, it's basically kind of like a spherical shape. It's a little bit smushed, and then it has a little pivot in here, and this little headphone doodad sticking out of here. And we've got an opening, we've got a little rounded piece in here, we've got a little blend in between, and we've got some separations here and here, and a little flexi connector and some things like that. So let's just jump into this thing and see what we're going to do with it. And in this case, I'm going to just start with a sphere, and I want to nail the sphere down at the origin, because a lot of the modeling that I'm going to do is referencing a center point. So I'm just going to hit 0 and drop a sphere. And in this case, I'm going to drag it out. I'm not going to worry a whole lot about the dimensions on this, but if you knew the dimensions, you could go ahead and input them and input this. If you notice from the top, it gives me an option for the diameter. So I'm going to go ahead and just drag it out to something that feels comfortable. I'm not going to worry a whole lot about the dimensions at this point. And the very first thing I want to do is I want to sculpt this object. If you'll notice, this is kind of like stretched here. It's not a perfect sphere. And instead of trying to like explicitly model all of that, I'm going to go in and just access the points of this particular object. So I'm going to pick this, I'm going to turn the points on, and you'll notice that if I go into perspective view, I get a cage of points surrounding this object. Well, let's look what happens if I started to try and sculpt with just these here. And it looks like I'm getting a fairly good result, but it's not quite as smooth as I would like. and it starts to become really apparent if I were to do something like try and scale this. You'll notice that it's just kind of sharp. It's not flowing smoothly, and that's because the initial primitive has a degree of 2. So I don't quite have enough points to do what I want to do. So I'm going to just rebuild this sphere using the rebuild command. And you'll notice that it gives me a bunch of options in here. And you'll notice this is what the sphere is to start with. It's got 8 points in the U, 5 points in the V, and it's a degree 2 in both surfaces. So I'm going to rebuild this, and I'm going to use the same point count. I'm just going to tab through this, but I'm going to let this go to degree 3. And when I run this now, you'll notice that I get a little bit better point distribution. It's a little bit nicer, and as I do this, this whole thing moves a little smoother. So I'm going to pull out a shape, something like that, and maybe we'll go to this view. And I'm going to shift drag on one of these handles, and I'm going to scale this down just a little bit. And then I'm going to flatten the bottom out just a hair. Oops, I can get all of those. Flatten this out a little bit. And then maybe I'll even do just a little bit of sculpting up here and flatten this out a little bit. So it's got a little bit more of an almond shape as opposed to that, really dramatic. Maybe we'll pull this in a little bit. And you'll notice just by moving the points, I can get a lot of shape out of this thing. And we can go crazy. I mean, if you wanted to move this, you can do all sorts of things like that. But for the purposes of this model, we're going to kind of keep it simple. All right. And so I'm going to rotate this so that it's in the same plane as my picture, so I don't have to keep moving around. So I'm going to pick this, and you'll notice on Gumball there's all sorts of little icons here. If I click on one of these, you'll notice the direction of the arrows. So if I want to rotate this thing in this direction, I want to actually enter negative values. So I'm going to enter -90. And then I want to rotate it again in this direction. So I'm going to click here. And again, the arrows are going this way, so I'm going to do -90. And that'll put it back to where I can kind of work on it. All right, so we've kind of got this shape here, and I'm pretty okay with that. So let's talk about how to model the end of this thing. And I'm going to use the split tool, but I'm going to use split by isocurve. So I'm going to right click on this tool, and I'm going to click on the surface. This is the object to split. Press enter when done, and you'll notice that I can drag an isoparam through here. Now, if I were to hit the T key, you'll notice the isoparam goes the other direction because I've toggled it. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the way it was before. And I'm actually going to drag this up to right about, let's take a look at our reference image, kind of right about somewhere in there feels about right. So I'm going to just hit that, and you'll notice that this splits into 2 pieces. Now, I could go through all the trouble of just deleting this and then have to go through and model this, but why do that? I like to use what I've got. So I'm going to just use Gumball, and I'm going to scale this in one direction to flatten it out. And then I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to drag on any of the handles, in this case just the green one because it's convenient, and I'm going to scale this down, and then I'm going to drag it inside. And if we go to the perspective view, you'll notice that it puts it right inside there. Now, this is feeling a little fat to me, so I'm going to pick everything, and I'm going to just scale this a little flatter, so that it kind of starts to have that same feeling in there. And then I want to connect this piece to this piece. And for that, I'm going to use the blend tool, the blend surface tool, which is here under the surface palette. And this is probably my favorite tool in all of Rhino. If this was a real tool in a toolbox, all the paint would be worn off the handle because I use this one for just about everything. And you'll see as we're going through this why, because it's a really flexible and really powerful tool. So once I pick the 2 edges of the surfaces that I want to blend, you'll notice the surface blend dialog box comes up, and there's some sliders in here that allow you to dynamically adjust how this comes together. And in this case, all I'm interested in is kind of really this transition in here. And so I think what I want is I want this to be sharp. So I'm going to either bring that all the way down, or possibly what I'm even going to do, see this is edge 1, so I'm going to reference edge 1 over here. I'm just going to hit position. And I'm going to let that go to just something that's sharp there. And then I'm going to drag this slider to adjust how it blends off of this surface. And in this case, you'll notice, see how this is kind of misaligned? I'm going to just pick this edge and I'm going to just move it so that it's straighter. Feels a little better. I'm going to just swing around this real quick and take a look and see how that's looking. And I'm pretty happy with that. You'll notice as I adjust it, I can make it a little bit bigger. So we'll go ahead and run that. So let's look at that. That's a really nice transition. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to pick everything and I'm going to join it. And what this does is this joins this into a single entity. And at this point, this model is watertight. So, so we've kind of already created this overall shape with our little return and the speaker opening. But you'll notice there's a material change here. So if we look at this, you know, this is kind of indicated of something soft by spraying dots on something on a sketch makes it soft. So we're going to assume that that's going to be a material change. So I need to make that break. So if I go back to my front view, I'm going to just drag a line and look through that. And I'm going to project that onto the surface using the Project Curves tool. And you'll notice the cool thing about this is I have history turned on. I have always record and update children. So if I pick the original curve, you'll notice that the curve on surface updates with it. And it's a little hard to see from that view. If I go to perspective window, this is the curve on surface right here. So if I pick this and move it, the curve on surface updates, which is a really cool way to do a little bit of design in 3D when you look at this thing and evaluate it. Maybe the sketch isn't really working in 3D. Maybe you have to make some decisions in 3D to make the thing better. So in this case, I'm going to do that. I'm going to just stretch this back a little bit, give myself a little bit more room in here. And you can delete the original curve if you're happy with it. If not, a lot of people like to keep their curves on a different surface so that you can go back and mess with them later. But in this case, I'm just going to do it so that it's clean. So so I'm going to pipe this. I'm going to make a pipe around here because I want to make a little tube that I'm going to use to pull out of this surface to make the break. So I'm going to go over here under the pipe command and I'm going to pick this and I'm going to drag this down to a fairly small value and say OK. And you'll notice what it did is it just made a little pipe around that curve. I can then very easily Boolean subtract this, delete the original bit, and I get a little groove. If I shade that, you can see what the result is. Okay, so we're very quickly, here's my email popping up, go away, very quickly have pretty much created the base of this object already. Looks like there's another cut line through here, so we'll do the exact same process to do that. So I'm going to use a circle. I'm going to lay this down at the origin. Remember we talked about laying this down at the origin. I'm going to drag it till it feels like it fits. And then I'm going to just use Gumball to position it. Project it onto the surface like we did before using the Project Curves. And take a peek at what I've got. So this is the original curve. If I bring this forward, it won't change anything. But you'll notice again, since history was on, as I move this, the projected curve will update. So this is time to evaluate your design and say, okay, is this working? You know, should this thing be thinner? Should it be fatter? Should it be the overall thing be smaller? And you can use your original generation curve with history turned on in order to evaluate what's happening with your surface. And in this case, I'm pretty happy with that. Maybe I'll bump it up just a hair more to get the feeling of covering all of that in there. And So I'm going to say that's okay. And in this case, just for clarity's sake, I'm going to delete that so that it's out of the way. And I'm going to pipe it again using the pipe command. Again, I'm going to use a little tiny value and something like that. I'm just eyeballing it to something that looks good. And again, do a Boolean subtract. This is the object I'm subtracting from. That's the object I'm subtracting with. Delete the original object. There's a setting in there, by the way, in Booleans. If I pick an object, you'll notice there's a setting up here that says delete input no. I usually leave that set to no. If you set it to yes, when you do the Boolean, the original input object you use will delete itself automatically. I tend to not do that just because if for some reason I don't like what I've seen, then it's really easy for me to go back and just redo the Boolean. So I've got my cut, and I've got my little split there. I've got my little split here, so I'm pretty good with that. I think we're in pretty good shape to move on to this piece here. So let's look at what's going on here. It looks to me like this is a fairly flat shape with some rounded edges, and then there's a circular detail in the middle that has like a little chamfer and some things like that. So, and it looks like this has got a little puff to it. So we'll dig into that a little bit and see what we can't do. So let's build the overall shape first. So to do this, I'm going to do it flat. And to do it flat, I'm just going to go to the front view. And I'm going to use a circle. And I'm going to snap it to the origin by hitting 0. And I want it to be a little bit less than the size of that cut line. And I'm in shaded mode so I can't see what I'm doing. I'm going to move this over so it's pretty concentric to where that was before. So for clarity's sake, I'm going to hide everything except for the curve that I'm working on. So I'm going to go up here under visibility, and I am going to invert the selection and hide objects. So I'm going to pick this, and I'm going to just do that. Everything's going to disappear except for my curve. So I'm going to get this curve right, and then I'll bring the rest of the model back and we'll deal with it. So I'm going to use a center rectangle. I'm going to nail the center of the rectangle down here to quad using OSnap, which are these things down here. And I'm going to drag out something that feels pretty headphone-alicious. So I'm going to do that about there. And you'll notice that it went high, but I don't really care about that because I'm just going to trim it off anyways. So I'm going to trim off of these and trim off this. And I've got this little kind of key shape. I want to blend this because if we look at our sketch, which is hidden for the time being, but if we went back and referenced the sketch, this would be nice and smooth. So let's do that. And I'm going to do that using an adjustable curve blend. And I'm going to go from here to here. And you'll notice that it just kind of makes a really nice blend in here. I can drag these out, and all the while it will maintain that nice blend. I can adjust it, and then I'm going to trim it and join it. So when I run this, you'll see that it actually knocks that out. Now I could go and do the same thing over again, but I'm not even going to worry about that. I'm just going to drag a line from the center, and I'm going to trim it, and I'm going to mirror it because I'm really lazy and I don't like doing things more than once. And once I find mirror, I always do it on a hotkey. There it is. They made me promise not to use hotkeys today since this was a beginner one. So now we've got our shape. And one more thing, since it's got a circular detail in the center, I think I'm going to just nail down a curve in there to locate where the center of this is. So let's bring everything back. So I'm pretty happy with the relationship, and let me just move this to the front so you can see it when I shade it. I'm pretty happy with the relationships that are going on here, and I like how this is kind of relatable to that. And so let's go with it. We can always adjust it later. So how do we make this shape? Well, I'm actually going to do it from this view. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to use a curve to kind of lay down a shape of how I want that thing to kind of transition. So, and I'm going to turn the points on for this, using points on. I'm going to adjust a little bit because I didn't quite nail that curve the way that I wanted it to look. So let's peel that in a little bit. I like how that's a little closer and then it peels out. Again, the thing that I love about Rhino is it allows you to design in 3D, make decisions where the decisions actually matter. You can sketch all day long and end up with pretty pictures, but at the end of the day, you have pretty pictures. So if you're designing in Rhino, at the end of the day, you've got something that you can send to a printer. So check that out. I took my curve, I clicked on it, I used Gumball to slide it out of the way, down here, and then I held down the control key, clicked on an arrow, oops, did it in the wrong order. Click on an arrow, hold the control key, and drag, and I pulled out a surface. So I don't have to use any of the tools over here. I can just use Gumball. I can actually model with Gumball. Let me show you that one more time because everybody always goes nuts when I do that. So I'm going to pick it, click the arrow and hold, click the control key and hold, drag, and you'll extrude out a surface. All right? So now that I've got that, I can pick these two objects and trim using the trim tool. I can trim here, and I can trim there. Hit the escape key to exit out of the tool, and I've got my shape. So that's all well and good, but how do we add some depth to it, some thickness? I'm going to hide these just so they're out of the way. Well, I'm going to drag with Gumball, and I'm just going to do a little tap on the Alt key to make a copy of it. As Brian James says, not a tap, just a tap. So we're going to drag and tap, and we're going to make a copy. So if you pick it, drag, tap, it'll make a copy. All right. So we've got two copies of it. We've got our front and our back. We're going to go back, and again, my favorite tool in the whole world, blend, surface. I'm going to pick this one and this one. I'm going to run it. And it remembers what I had set last time, so it remembers that edge 1 was positioned. So I'm going to switch that to curvature. Actually, I'm just going to switch it to tangency because I don't even need curvature on this. And I'm going to lock this, and I'm going to slide these back just a little bit and watch it update. You can see down here what's happening as I do that. See, they're coming farther. Again, designing in 3D, making decisions where they matter. This is the workflow I use all the time. All right, so I'm going to say OK and accept that. I'm going to do the exact same thing, and since I'm using the same tool, I'm just going to right-click, and it's going to re-invoke the last tool that I used. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to lock this, and I'm going to pull this back like so and say OK. All right, pick all of these. Oops, not that one. Join, make a poly surface, and I've got an opening down here that I'm going to just go ahead and close using the cap command. Cap looks for planar holes and just throws a surface in there. If this model had 500 planar holes in it and they were all good and able to be closed up and I ran cap, it would run and cap all of those up. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this. It's changed a little bit from our sketch. This is a little bit more teardroppy, but I think I actually kind of like this more mechanical look anyways. So I think I'm going to stick with that. I like this, how this is S-ing around here as opposed to just dropping straight off like this is here. So I think I'm going to just stick with the plan here. So I'm going to bring some of my curves back, and if you remember, I had a curve that I used to trim this hole, and I'm going to repurpose that curve, and I'm going to scale it down a little bit. go back to my perspective view. I'm going to pull it out like this. And I'm going to, again, click and hold Control, and I'm going to drag and actually make that into a surface. See that? Gumball is super, super, super powerful in the fact that you can do all this kind of really cool stuff. So you'll see that it's intersecting a little bit. So I'm going to pick that and shift click on any of the handles and drag, and that scales in 3D. So I'm going to pull this down just a little bit. And then I want to get that nice kind of bulge in here. And again, you know, I kind of just use this sketch to get me started. I'm at this point now, I'm making my decisions in 3D. I may look back at the sketch every so once in a while to decide, you know, what I like better, feel like whether I'm missing this or not. But I'm kind of feeling how this is going, so I'm going to just continue with the model and go from there. So how do we get this nice little bulgy feature in here in the top of this surface? I'm going to hide that original curve. I'm going to use Patch. Patch is a cool tool for doing this kind of stuff because if you preview it, you'll notice that it makes a really nice rounded cap. If I change the stiffness on this, the stiffness value, like say I change this to 2, you'll notice that it flattens out a little bit because it's forcing it to be just a little bit stiffer. If I raise this to 10, it gets really soft and round. So I'm going to kind of go somewhere in the middle, say 5. Something like that. Now, this is a little too bulgy, so I'm going to go to my right view, and I'm going to scale this in one direction. I'm going to use Scale 1D. This is going to be the object to scale. This is going to be where the origin of where the scale is going to start from, and drag out here, and I'm just going to squish this down a little bit, like that. Join these two together. And take a look at what I've got. Let's shade this. So it's kind of coming along nicely. This looks like it's a little far away from the headphone for me. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this in a little bit more, like that. That feels a little more integrated. And now this is sticking out too far, so I'm going to just pull this in. That starts to feel a little more compact and a little cooler. So this is a separate piece, so I'm going to hide this for now and just deal with these guys. And since they're overlapping, this object's closed and this object's open. So I'm going to Boolean them together, and it worked like I expected it to work. But let's look at a common problem that happens with Booleans, and it's related to what's referred to as surface normals. All surfaces have a direction, and if you look at this tool down here, this is Analyze Direction. If you click on a surface, you'll see arrows come up. If, for instance, the arrows were pointing in, which can happen on open surfaces for a number of reasons. Closed surfaces, they almost always point out unless there's a problem, but open surfaces, they can flip either direction. So let's say that it's facing in and I tried to run this Boolean. Most likely, it's going to fail or give me the wrong result, because what it said was, oh, that thing was inside out and that thing was inside out and it didn't do what I expected it to do. So what I would need to actually do to fix that is to flip my normals so that they faced out. Now when I do it, it works as expected. So I'm going to soften up this transition just a little bit just by using a fillet, simple fillet. And you'll notice what's going to happen here when I run this. See how big this radius is? I want to make it smaller. I can do that a couple ways. One, I can use the set all and actually enter a value. Or since I'm designing in 3D here, I'm going to just eyeball it. And I'm going to drag this down until it feels about right. I'm going to click that. I'm going to take a look at it and make sure that it's not doing anything crazy, like overlapping a surface or overlapping an edge or anything like that, and then just run it. And I get a nice fillet. Excuse me. All right, so let's bring back the other part and take a look and see how they're relating. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. And I think we're ready to get into a little bit more detailing. So if I go back to my sketch, it seems like there's a couple of little cutouts around here, some sort of indication, or maybe it was just a jitter in my hand or whatever. But for whatever reason, I'm picking up like there should be some little details around this thing. Little pieces of jewelry. So let's go ahead and do that. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide everything except the base piece which I'm working on, and I'm going to do that by invert hide. Oops, pick this, invert hide. So it's going to hide everything except that. And I'm going to just pick some primitive object like a circle or a cylinder, drag out the diameter, go to the perspective view and drag out the length. And I don't want it to cut in quite so far, so I'm just going to use gumball and I'm going to slide it out just a hair. Go back to the front view. And I'm going to array this around a circle and around the edge here. So I'm going to use transform array polar. And I'm going to snap to the center of that object. And there's 7 items in here. Let's take a look and see what that looks like. So before I finish the tool, I can get a little preview of what this thing is going to look like. And I can change the items. Maybe I want 5. 5 looks like too many. Maybe I want 9. 9 looks pretty cool. So I'm going to right click to accept that. And I have these little objects in space. I'm going to use these as cutters to actually cut these little details out. So I'm going to Boolean subtract. So this is where I'm subtracting from. This is what I'm subtracting from it. And again, you know, like I said before, I tend to not delete the objects. And I get this cool little pattern through here. Let's bring back everything and take a look. It's starting to come together. All right, so headphones always have a cord. So let's take a look at, and I'm going to hide the curves for right now. And so I want the cord to kind of come out of the center here. So I'm going to start with, how are we going to do this? Let's see. Let's look at our sketch. Looks like this kind of tapers down. There's a little nerny flex thing in here, and then there's the cord. So let's think about how we want to do that. So the cord's probably going to be round. This thing's kind of a rounded square shape. So let's throw a cylinder off the end of this thing. And I'm going to use Smart Track, which is going to allow me to pick the quad there and the center there and find the intersection. And I'm going to snap it to the length there. So that's about what I want to do. But what I'm going to do is actually pull this apart. I'm going to make a gap. And then I want to blend from this into this nice and smoothly. So I'm going to pull the surface out using Extract Surface. If I right click on the explode icon, I can extract a surface. I'm going to pull off this one and this one. So I'm going to open these up. I'm going to make a hole here and delete that. And then I'm going to give you one guess which tool I'm going to use. Blend surface. Pick this and this. And I'm going to run a blend between there. And I'm going to move this so it's got a convenient place to kind of start from. I'm going to move this to the middle there. And I'm going to move this to the middle there. And that just makes it just makes the blend have a little bit easier time, you know, connecting from one to the other. And since it's adjustable, I can come in here and kind of decide, do I want it to be like a real thin one, or do I want it to be that, or do I want it to have a little step in it? I just kind of want it to be nice and even, so I'm going to play with that until I'm happy with it and then say OK. Now, I'd like some indication that this has some sort of flex to it. So right now it's smooth. If I were to shade this, it's a really nice transition between the two, but it doesn't look flexy. So let's add some flexy to it. I'm going to do that by rebuilding. And again, I'm just going to sculpt some points. So let's take a look at this. All right, it's already degree 3, so I'm okay with that. It's got 49 points in the U, which is in this direction. So all the lines going vertically are the U. And I want all of those because I don't want the shape to change. So I'm going to make this 49. But I want more in this direction. So I'm going to do this like something big, like 15. And you'll notice that I get a lot more lines in this direction. And you'll see why in just a second. So now when I turn the points on, I have a lot more points to deal with. So watch this. I'm going to select this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. I'm skipping each and every other one in case you're not getting that. And then I'm going to use Gumball, and I'm going to squish it in this direction. And then I'm going to use Gumball, and I'm going to squish it in this direction. And Viola, I get a flexi. Super simple. I don't have to draw curves. I don't have to do a whole lot of thinking. And it makes me look a lot more talented than I probably actually am. So let's join that up. And then in this case, I probably want to make the cord longer, because if I was going to do a rendering of this thing, I'd probably want to have the cords going off of the scene. So I can either delete this and work off of that, but I think I'm going to just be lazy, and I'm going to extract this surface and delete it. And I'm going to snap a curve to the center of this thing. And I'm going to go into front view. And then I'm going to just draw something that looks like a cord that goes far enough off the scene that it won't render, or it won't be seen once it renders. Do a simple sweep 1, where this is the rail, this is the edge. Let it run. Join it up. Excuse me. And I've got a headphone. A little different than my sketch, but the cool thing about working in Rhino is it's flexible enough that you can make decisions about what you want this thing to look like. And as this was developing, I kind of noticed some things in here that I liked better about the model, so that's the way I went with it. So I want to add one more little piece of jewelry onto this thing, and I brought in a Rhino logo. You maybe remember this from the packaging. So I'm just going to bring this in, and I'm going to stick it there, and I'm going to bring it out like this, and I'm going to scale it down using shift drag on Gumball. And I'm going to place it just so, and I'll just make sure that that is nailed down where I want it to be nailed down. And Boolean. Did I lose something there? Maybe I sunk it in just a hair too far. Looked weird when I Booleaned it. Let's do that. There we go. Yeah, the jaw disappeared, that's why. Alright. Ooh, what if we were to sink it in? That would be cool. I kind of like that better. What if we were to sink this in here like this? Let's do that. Let's suck it out of there. So we're going to Boolean subtract it instead of adding it. Delete this. And we get a cool sunk-in logo. I kind of like that even better, because then there'd be like a cool paint treatment or something on that. And that's pretty much where we are, you know. So what do we got? About 40 minutes of modeling, and if we wanted to make a set of these, we could just drag and tap Alt to make a copy, and then rotate it a little bit, and drag it around over here. And then we've got something that maybe we rotate these around so they lay flat. Let's do that. And put them up here. All right. So that's pretty much where we're at. And I'm not even going to get into rendering or anything like that right now. We'll do another presentation on rendering and things like that. But I just wanted you to look at my thought process, how I go through things, how I get away from kind of the clean sheet syndrome, how to trim, how to use, you know, booleans and projected curves and pipes to make little surface treatments, and how you can get a lot out of just doing some rebuild and some point sculpting and, you know, stuff like that. So we did a lot. We did this cool little object with, you know, only 4 or 5 different tools. So that's pretty much what I've got for you today. I hope that was helpful. I hope that it gets you started on your own.